We actually probably all agree that there are certain things that for our national security, we absolutely have to be manufacturing.
100%. I think everybody agrees on that.
Pharmaceuticals, chips, steel, aluminum, microchips. Steel and aluminum, Trump slapped 25% tariffs on China on them in his first term. And the price went up for about 4 months, and then it came right back down because we have a very healthy free market economy within America. And the average steel worker who works, by the way, in the South, so these are in right-to-work states, these are not union jobs, makes $88,000 a year. This is why manufacturing is so coveted. So I guess my question to you, Abby, would be, so we all acknowledge that this manufacturing has to be done here.
I get that.
So where's the disconnect?
But those targeted, I mean, even if I'm not going to pass judgment on the Trump 1.0 tariffs. It's complex, right? But even if that were the case, those are much more targeted than what he is trying to do right now. And what he's trying to do right now is like slap tariffs on toys coming out of Vietnam as if that is like the future of American manufacturing when it's not. And those things are not as important for our national security. And all they do is raise prices on everyday Americans. I think that's the part that I'm not understanding.
Well, right now, there's only a 10% tariff on Vietnam because that's the standard across for 90 days.
But I'm talking about what he announced on the so-called Liberation Day.
Vietnam has said they're going to drop their tariffs to zero. So the thing about Trump is he loves tariffs because he thinks they do a lot of things. They protect our national security. They reshore manufacturing. They raise revenues.
But tariffs do not reshore manufacturing.
They raise revenues.
They do not.
Tariffs
by themselves do not reshore manufacturing. You have to also do other things to encourage manufacturing in the country.
The original boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. So we got to talk about the current trade war that is happening between the United States, led by President Trump, and China, led by Xi Jinping. Now, I got to tell you guys, the last 2 weeks have really opened my eyes to how much Chinese influence is in this country, right? It seems as if the Democrats, the media, Wall Street, and maybe even the Federal Reserve, they're all pro-China, right? They are actively rooting against President Trump to win this trade war because they want to maintain the status quo, right? They don't want to stop doing business in China, right? They love China. Some of these people are probably bought and sold by China, especially the Democrat Party. And I think that's part of the reason why you're seeing them attack Trump so much. It's not just their Trump derangement, but also these people legitimately would much rather see China win than Trump to win. Okay, it is treasonous at this point, right? I mean, I'm so serious because they're all putting pressure on President Trump through propaganda, lies, to get him to back down to China. Okay, they're pretending that President Trump is the bad guy and that China somehow has the upper hand on us, even though they're more reliant on us than we are reliant on them. But somehow, some way, the mainstream liberal media is trying to make it seem as if, China is winning or that, President Trump is folding to China. And that's not necessarily the case because President Trump has continued to ratchet up the tariffs on China, even despite the financial warfare from China. It seems as if China, again, they're the ones that are actually suffering the most economically.
Who suffers the most in this trade war, China or the United States?
Well, China does. First of all, its economy is probably contracting. We saw this from the price data for March, where both consumer and producer prices were below zero. Also, the thing is, they're having their 2008 right now. In 2008, they didn't want a downturn. They overstimulated, took on a lot of debt. Now they got to deal with the debt. Property market is collapsing. And then Trump says, we're having this tariff war. And what this does is it really closes off China's biggest market, the United States. So the 145% tariffs, most Chinese goods don't get into the U.S. because of that. Now, the only way that Xi Jinping can win this trade war is if he can convince President Trump, who's holding all the high cards from an objective point of view, the only way Xi Jinping wins is if he can get Wall Street or Main Street or the farmers to force Trump to back down preemptively. I don't think that's going to happen because our president's pretty determined.
Could he unleash, Xi Jinping, could he unleash financial warfare? China holds $760 billion worth of treasury debt. If they sell some of it, prices go down and our interest rates go up. He could do that.
He could do that, but he probably not going to, because that has a lot of effect on the renminbi. Remember, he wants to sell U.S. dollar debt because he needs to prop up his currency, but he needs to do it in a controlled manner. If he crashes the U.S. dollar, which he probably could do, it's lights out for him. So I don't think he's going to do that. He's got a lot more vulnerabilities than we do. We're the bigger economy. We're the trade deficit economy. We hold the high cards.
Now, Xi Jinping is about to embark on a tour of Southeast Asia, touring his neighbors. He's looking for support, isn't he? He wants them to gang up with Xi Jinping against America. Is that going to happen?
I don't really think so. The problem here is that Xi Jinping now has a lot of goods he's not selling to the U.S. He needs to sell them to other ASEAN countries. Maybe they'll take a few more, but probably not, because they don't want the Chinese to decimate their own internal industries. So I think Xi Jinping's going to have a hard time. He'll get these guys to say some very lovely things, but I don't think they're going to move on substantive points.
Yeah, so I think this guy makes some good points. The only point in which I would disagree with what he said is that I think that China is already selling treasuries. Okay, now there's no way to know. There's been a whole lot of speculation, but there's no way to know in real time who has been selling all of the treasuries, driving up yields, right? Clearly, whoever's doing it is launching financial warfare against the United States, and is happening so much that, again, it has to be a large entity like a country or Wall Street. I personally believe it's definitely Wall Street, because Wall Street is over leveraged. They've come out and admitted that, hey, we're over leveraged and that we can't have the market continuing to decline. But yet they're spreading propaganda claiming that, oh, no, it's actually our allies like Japan. Japan, they're selling treasuries. And I'm not saying that they haven't sold any, but if they have sold any, it has nothing to do with retaliation against Trump, right? Considering how Japan was one of the first countries, the first country to come to the table, it does not make any sense for them to sell treasuries in retaliation to President Trump's tariffs, Liberation Day, if they're trying to make a deal. It just doesn't make sense, right? At all, okay? If they did sell treasuries, it's only because they've been doing so periodically to stabilize their own currency. It has nothing to do with the trade war. But again, somebody purposely is selling treasuries to drive up interest rates, to drive up yields in the United States, to hurt and to squeeze our economy. I think the obvious answer is China. But again, Wall Street doesn't want to admit that. They don't want to say that out loud because it hurts China. And again, a lot of these people are heavily invested in China. And if they're selling their treasuries already, that means that basically they're in panic mode. Okay, now why do I say that they will be in panic mode? Well, the reason why is because in the long term, selling U.S. treasuries would hurt China. Okay, it would make it more expensive for them to export to other countries because they effectively be selling the dollar for the yuan, which would strengthen the yuan. And again, long term goes against what they're trying to do, right? Which is to sell things cheaply to the rest of the world. But in the short term, especially, again, if you're trying to get President Trump to fold, okay, China selling treasuries, along with Wall Street as well, too, okay, because they're selling. So both of these entities selling treasuries, driving up yields, basically can spook the world, spook investors, spook the United States, spook President Trump, the Trump administration, into believing that people are abandoning the dollar, right? That President Trump's trade war is a threat to the dollar as the world's reserve currency, because you see people selling the dollar and the stock market is declining, right? So where are they going, right? That is what people are wondering. If they're going to the bonds of foreign countries like Europe or some other places, then that would suggest that, again, the dollar is losing its status as a reserve currency. Now, again, that's the narrative that's being put out there because that narrative benefits China and puts more pressure on President Trump to fold. Okay, so that's why you have all these people coming out here and saying, it's Japan. Japan is doing it, right? Or the Europeans are doing it. But they got to understand, China holds bonds, U.S. treasuries, indirectly in Europe as well, too. So if you see selling in Europe, then, again, that could also likely be China because, again, they hold U.S. treasuries in European banks, right? They hold U.S. treasuries in European companies. So I just want people to understand how deep the propaganda is, okay? Even in the financial media, when you actually understand how things work, you understand when things don't make sense, right? When certain narratives don't make sense. Like the narrative of Japan selling U.S. treasuries in retaliation against President Trump makes zero sense. Again, unless you're a hedge fund manager on Wall Street who wants to put that out there so that people think that President Trump is a threat to the dollar as a reserve currency, which again would be a reason for President Trump to fold. Because again, if you are a Wall Street investor and you're heavily invested in China, you want the president to fold, right? That is what you want. Okay, if you're over leveraged or heavily invested in China, you want to maintain the status quo. That's what you want to do, right? And all of these media outlets, okay, the Democrats, they're all interested in maintaining the status quo because it doesn't matter if America wins. To them, all they care about is their own pocketbooks, right? If they get richer and China wins, they're totally cool with that. They're totally fine with that, okay? They are pro CCP, and they also hate Trump. So at this point, this is why they're working overtime to try to make President Trump fold, but it's not working. Even CNN, who, again, might as well rename their network to the Chinese News Network. Even they are reluctantly admitting that, yeah, China's kind of folding.
China. And Jim, I'm really curious to get your perspective on the White House's handling of the situation. Not so much the tariffs that have been announced, but this reporting that the White House, that officials have made clear to Beijing that they want Xi to ask for a call with Trump. Yeah. Trump hasn't reached out directly. What do you make of that approach?
And the White House saying they want Xi to reach out for it. Can you get any more high school in matters of state? It's ridiculous. He's got to
call me, Jim.
Yeah, and listen, what's interesting is, as I was reporting yesterday, the Chinese impression is that they are willing to at least negotiate, not necessarily on Donald Trump's terms, but to talk. But their impression is that the U.S. has not opened channels and not made an effort to open up channels to allow that. So now you have the U.S. president say, well, I'm not going to open those channels. China has to open them first. It's kind of ridiculous at the end of the day because you are playing with the interests of American consumers, Chinese consumers, et cetera. The other point I would make about China's reaction today in not quite meeting the U.S. tariffs, 145%, U.S. China goes to 125. And in Xi's statement, he says, we're going to 125 in response. That's as high as we're going because this is getting a little ridiculous, right? Mm-hmm. And that's both a signal to say we're not going to get caught up in this tit for tat to the degree that the president is, but it's also an opening to say, okay, we're capping this for now, and that perhaps offers a way forward that we could begin talking about how to bring these down.
You've lived in China. Mm-hmm. You've covered China for some time now. As we're looking at this question of who's going to blink first, with two very different political systems, what is your gauge on this?
Well, different systems. Listen, one's a democracy, one is not. One's a single-party state, very much not a democracy. But China does have politics, and Chinese leaders do not want to be seen. We were talking about this yesterday, I believe. Do not want to be seen as capitulating to America. That is not good politics for a Chinese leader. Long colonial history to go back into, we could talk for hours, but they don't want to be seen as kowtowing to the West here. So the browbeating is not a great diplomatic strategy. And we've seen that in the past as well. Now, we should say Donald Trump mixes in with the tariff browbeating some comments about how good a friend he is with Xi. But we'll see if the door has been closed for now, or if there's a little bit of an opening and perhaps they start opening those channels.
Richard, it's interesting to explore the power that the EU has now because they can tip the scales in terms of how impactful these tariffs will be for either nation, depending on where negotiations land.
So you've got the Spanish Prime Minister in Beijing. You've got the EU basically saying, well, we're going to start looking at other markets. I think this will most certainly give a huge boost to China-EU relations to try and complete some form of trade agreement, because everybody is now wanting to circumnavigate the United States. Now, you can't up to a point. There are certain things, there are certain inalienable bonds of trade between the EU and the US. That doesn't mean to say you can't reduce it, your reliance. And just as much as the US is now saying, we want to reduce our reliance on China, we want to make sure we are no longer strategically dependent, the EU absolutely is saying, is there a deal to be done with Brazil and Mercosur? Is there a deal to be done with ASEAN, a stronger one? Jim, can I just ask Jim, do you think, sorry guys, but do you think that the Xi statement is actually a sort of not a white flag, but just a sort of an olive branch that both sides can now take to move forward?
I think it has two sides to it. One, it's a bit of a message to the U.S. to say, this is silly. This is getting silly. We're not going to play this game of chicken. But Xi Jinping, also by not going right up to the level of U.S. tariffs, I think one can look at that as a small opening for discussions. Both of them want to talk. Now the question is, I suppose, who picks up the phone first? That's where we are.
You see, Boris, Brianna, that's what happens when you get two anchors who are also your guests. We'll just hijack the whole...
Yeah, so CNN is reluctantly admitting that China, they're starting to feel the pressure because they're not raising their tariffs as much as they were, right? They're not matching the United States. Like they're not really trying to continue to ratchet up, even though Trump clearly is trying to ratchet it up, right? And again, it's almost as if they're hoping that Trump folds first. Oh, well, this is a high school game. And it's like, you guys don't understand. No, this is how negotiations work, right? The first one that comes to the table that makes the first offer is the loser, right? They're the loser, okay? Everybody knows this, but apparently CNN doesn't, right? And it's just so funny how that works. China, in my opinion, I think that they want to end it now. And they're trying to apply maximum pressure on President Trump through financial warfare, okay, in which, again, they have Wall Street basically lobbying on behalf of China. You got the mainstream liberal media lobbying on behalf of China, and the Democrat Party lobbying on behalf of China. And China basically is saying, okay, well, we're not trying to escalate anymore, right? We're not trying to escalate anymore, and we're open for talks. But again, we just want to save face. We want to save face. We want Trump to come to us, but we do want to talk, right? Now, again, if you listen to most of the mainstream liberal media, they'll make it seem like Trump is losing. That, China, they're good. They're going to go to Europe. They're going to develop new relationships. And, all these other countries they're going to, like, oh, the rest of the world doesn't need the United States. Again, they are rooting against the United States of America. But they don't understand that, again, it is going to be very hard for China to get by without the U.S. market, right? They can't just dump all their goods around the rest of the world because the rest of the world, they don't buy as much stuff as we do, right? We buy all their stuff. So if they don't have access to our market, people become unemployed, right? And it's hard for them to make up for that. It is going to be very hard for them to make up for it. And that's why I think that they're desperate, right? I think that they're going to try to de-escalate, right? But again, you wouldn't know that if you listen to the mainstream liberal media. I could be wrong. But again, to me, what you're seeing in the media is them not really explaining, hey, that China's hurting too, right? We may be hurting, but China's also hurting, right? They're not really explaining. They're not making it clear, okay, that China's not unscathed and that this is hurting them really badly, okay? And that's why they're not escalating anymore. But also on top of that, there's more bad news for the media is that their propaganda when it comes to tariffs isn't really working because the GOP is actually gaining when it comes to some of the poll numbers about who people think are working on behalf of them, right? As, again, the GOP gains as the party of the people. And CNN was shocked to learn that voters are now moving towards the Republican Party as the People's Party.
This, to me, is one of the most shocking pieces of poll data that I truthfully have seen this year or maybe in any prior year.
Really?
Yes, really, because I want you to take a look. Cares more about the needs for people like you. You mentioned it, Kate Baldwin. We got a tie, even after this tariff war had already started, split between Democrats and Republicans on how people feel which party cares more for needs of people like you. And why is that so surprising? Because I want you to take a look at prior years. Democrats always lead on this question. Back in 2017, before the 2018 midterms, 13-point lead. 2005, a 23-point lead for Democrats. 1994, which was a big Republican year, a 19-point lead for Democrats. And now, all of a sudden, a tie? All of a sudden, the Democrats, who are the party of the people, no more. We get a tie on this question, on a question that has traditionally overwhelmingly been a Democratic advantage. Which party cares more for the needs of people like you? It's truly something I would not have expected to see, especially after this tariff war had begun.
Well, that's silly because Democrats have come out and shown how much they are the party of Wall Street, right? They're the party of the big banks, right? The financial institutions in China, right? That's what they've shown. So why would people believe after this tariff thing, right, this tariff war, that the Democrats are the party of the people when Democrats have been boo-hoo crying about the rich, right? For the last 2 weeks straight, right? I'm just saying, I don't think that it would be logical to believe that the Democrats are gaining points with the people as, again, they currently root for China, right? And cry on behalf of Wall Street.
Where does it show that Republicans are making the most gains?
Yeah, again, you talk about party of the people. Look at this. Cares for the needs of people like yourself. Look here, we got non-college, we got those with a college degree. Among those with a college degree, it's the same score. 8 plus 18 points for Democrats in 2017, plus 18 points for Democrats now. But look among non-college voters. Look here. It was plus 7 for Democrats in 2017, and now Republicans had overwhelmingly gained, plus 9 points. That is, the gains have been concentrated, at least within the last decade, among voters without a college degree, the working class. That is where Republicans have gained even since the beginning of the Donald Trump administration. The Democratic base is now those with a college degree. Among the working class, those without a college degree, Republicans have overwhelmingly gained on this all-important question of which party cares more for people like yourself.
Well, again, Democrats look down on people who don't have college degrees. They look down on manual labor. They look down on blue-collar work, right? This is what they do. There are Chinese memes going around, Chinese propaganda going around that is being spread by Democrats and liberals because, again, they're a party of China at this point. But these memes are making fun of rural Americans, GOP voters, working in sweatshops, right? China is putting out these memes of, these, rural looking, like stereotypically looking, people, right, in the Midwest or whatever, working these jobs, and they're making fun of it, right? And again, the Democrats, the liberals, they're spreading that, right? Like they're making fun of labor, okay? And it really shows you the type of people that they are, right? That they do look down on blue collar work. They really do. And again, this is why people don't think that the Democrat Party is a party of the people anymore. They're a party of elites because they have very elite and snobbish attitudes towards half of the country. People who don't live in these big liberal cities working these blue collar jobs.
Your reference points are, as you were pointing out, just before a midterm election. So obviously, let's kind of look at that. Where do things stand for the fight for Congress?
Right. Okay. So you have this question, right? And then there's the question, ultimately, are Republicans going to get punished in this midterm election, in part because that's normally what happens, the party in power gets punished, but also because of this tariff war. And I want you to take a look here at the generic congressional ballot. Where we were in April of 2017, Democrats were already ahead by 7 points. In November of 2024 on this question, it was a tie, and then, of course, Republicans won control. Where are we now? It's Democrats, but just by a point. This looks very much still like what we saw in 2024, not like what we saw in 2017. If Democrats think they automatically have a ticket back to control of the House, I'd say, hold on a second, Republicans still have a real shot at this, despite all of Trump's theatrics over the last month with this tariff war.
That really is interesting information coming out in this that you're pulling out. Thank you.
Yeah, so despite all the propaganda, it hasn't worked, right? Democrats haven't gained any ground when it comes to the probability of them winning in the midterms, right? Which is honestly amazing news, right? Considering how these people have basically said that the world is going to end, the dollar's under attack, your 401k is going to be wiped out, your retirement's going to be wiped out, the world is ending, right? Stock market's taking, like all this stuff still has not tanked the Trump administration or the GOP. That's the crazy part. And it's only going to get better, right? In 1 year, we're going to be in a much better place, right? It's only the beginning. It's only the beginning. So again, this is really bad news for Democrats. It just shows you how propaganda just doesn't work anymore. It's just non-effective, right? It's just not effective at all. It really is. It really is fascinating. So anyways, we're going to see what happens with this trade war between President Trump, the world, and China. But, just keep in mind that the liberal media, they're rooting against Trump. Wall Street is rooting against Trump. Democrats are rooting against Trump. Everybody's rooting against Trump because in their financial interests, it's better for China to win, right? They want to maintain the status quo. They also hate Trump as well, too. But again, it really is about maintaining the status quo with China, okay? And they don't care if China wins in the long run because, again, they're rich, right? So that's what's happening here. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.